This is the generation of them that seek his face. This is the generation of them that seek his face.
Shabbat Shalom. We want to welcome each and every one of you that are here at the congregation. And we also want to thank those of you that are coming in through our YouTube channel, Torah Unleashed, and Facebook, and any other platforms that we are coming to you. We want to welcome each and every one of you. Today, we want to come and study about what we eat and what we don't eat. And that is in the parasha Shimini. And so we want to study the Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic secrets of Passover. There's a lot of secrets to Passover that a lot of people, definitely most Christians, don't know, but there's secrets to Passover that even Jewish people don't know. And I'm going to be revealing some of these secrets starting next week. So I want everyone to join us for the next 3 weeks on this series on the Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic secrets of Passover. Today we are going to parasha number 26. We're 26 Shabbats into the year, and it's called Shimini. Everybody say with me, Shimini. It's not Shemini, it's Shimini. Those two little dots right there called a shva. When you have two dots at the beginning of a word, the most important thing is you slide over them for the next syllable, which is me, and then ni, Shimini, Shimini. And it means the eighth, or it means eight. And today's study is from Leviticus 9:1 to 11:47. And so we want to welcome every one of you that are coming in through our Facebook or YouTube, and those of you that are here, we want to welcome each and every one of you. Today's study has 18 different teachings. Every parasha has a number of teachings. Now, in most teachings on the parasha that are given in either Jewish or Messianic Jewish congregations, they usually pick one or two. What I like to do is I kind of want to give an overview, because I want to focus on the larger aspect of the parasha and have you dig deeper during the week into the specific aspects of that parasha. And so today we're going to look at, again, as we do every week, at the general things, and we're going to focus on the clean and unclean animals today. So we're going to be looking at that. But it begins with Leviticus 9:1, Vayachi Beyom, and it was in the day Ha Shemini. Now in this one, you see that's on the second, so now you pronounce it Ha Shemini. Vayachi Beyom, on the 8th day, Kara, called Moshe, or Moshe called, and he called to Acharon, to Aaron, and to the sons of Aaron, and to Ul Zaken, and all the elders of Israel. On the 8th day Moses summoned, he called Kara, Aaron and his sons, and the elders, the Zaken of Israel. and he called them on the 8th day. Now, what's important about the 8th day, and we're going to learn this while we've studied it when we talk about tabernacles, Sukkot, and when we talk about Hanukkah. Now, there is a connection between tabernacles and Hanukkah, and that connection is 8 days. The 8 days of tabernacles and the 8 days of Hanukkah. Now, if you get the 8 days of Sukkot, tabernacles, and the 8 days of Hanukkah, they become one. Hanukkah is actually a second tabernacles. Hanukkah is a second tabernacles. And because the Maccabees couldn't do tabernacles because they were fighting, right after tabernacles they won and they came, and between tabernacles and what is now Hanukkah, they liberated the temple and they rededicated the altar. Now the altar was, and again at the end of Exodus, we're at the beginning of Leviticus now, but at the end of Exodus, the tabernacle is set up. And it takes 8 days to consecrate the tabernacle. It took 8 days. And on the 8th day, now last week we studied in the last two parashot, the parashot Vayikra and parashot Tzav, have to do with the offerings, as Adonai gave Moshe the offerings or the korbanot that they were supposed to do. And the different korbanot, there was 5 korbanot, if you remember from last week. And he gave it to them, and he said, these are the offerings. So today, now it's the 8th day. It's the last day of what would become the last day of tabernacles, and it's the 8th day, the last day of what would become the last day of Hanukkah. And on this day is when they did the sacrifice. Now watch what it says. On the 8th day, Moses summoned Aharon and his sons and the elders of Israel. And he said to Aaron, take a calf. Take a calf. And he tells them what he needs to do to dedicate the altar, to dedicate the tabernacle. And then go down to verse 6. And then it says, and they brought what Moses had commanded in front of the tent of meeting. And when the whole community came and stood before Yahweh, Moses said, this is what Yahweh has ordered to be done so that his glory may be visible to you. That his glory. Now, what is the glory? Now, the Hebrew word here is the word kavod. Say with me, kavod. Many times we say kol hakavod when someone does something good or something good happens. The expression, Israeli expression is kol hakavod. All the glory, and all the glory should go to who? To Adonai. By the way, over here it says kavod. Glory is kavod. It does not say Shekhinah, or what is called in Pentecostal circles, the Shekinah. You've heard people, the Shekinah. Well, sad to say, unknown, this is a secret that a lot of people don't know, unknown to most people, there is no such thing as a Shekinah. Oops. Where did that come from? That came in from Kabbalah. The Shekinah, and again, this is why we do not use that term, and I encourage everyone not to use that term. If you want to talk about the glory, what is the Hebrew word? Kavod. The Kavod Yahweh. The Kavod Adonai. The Shekinah, or the Shekhinah, in a Hebraic pronunciation, is a feminine word, and it talks about the feminine aspects of the Holy Spirit. Oops. That does not come into Scripture. That is from Kabbalah. So anyone, and most Christians are not even aware of that, and most Jewish people are. Some are not aware of that, but it's the glory. Adonai wants to show forth his glory. The reason for the offerings You bring these korbanot, these offerings, and remember what the korbanot were all about. It's about presence, the presence of Yahweh, approaching Yahweh, coming to Yahweh with these offerings. And when Adonai sees the offerings on the 8th day, after 8 days of celebrating, on the 8th day, go with me to verse 22 now. Then Aaron raised his hands towards the people and blessed them. Having thus performed the sacrifice for sin, the Holocaust, the communion sacrifices, all the korbanot. Remember, the korbanot are these sacrifices. Then he says, he came down and entered the tent of meeting with Moses. Then they came out together to bless the people, and the kavod, once again, the glory of Yahweh appeared to the whole people, and a flame leaped forth from before Yahweh and consumed the holocaust and the fat that was on the altar. At this sight, the people shouted for joy and fell on their faces. This was the first Hanukkah. This was the first dedication of the altar. The word Hanukkah means to dedicate. This is the first time the altar was Chanukkad, if you will. It was dedicated. The next time will be in the first temple with Solomon. The same thing happened. The kavod came and the fire came. And then the same thing happened with the second temple when Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah built that temple. The same thing happened there. And the kavod, the glory, is the presence of Yahweh. And notice that what Adonai had told Moshe from last week. He says that fire should always be kept burning. They did not light the first fire. They put the korbanot, the sacrifices, on the altar, and it is Adonai, by his power, that came down and lit the fire. The glory of Yahweh appeared. The kavod, which is a flame, which is a like what we would call a ball of fire. Remember, we saw that in the burning bush. When the bush it wasn't a bush that was burning. It says there was a bush there, and in the midst of the bush, there was a fire. And of course, that fire had nothing to do with ash, with fire as we know it. It was a different kind of fire. It was the glory of Yahweh fire. And you shall be baptized with the Holy Spirit and with fire. You shall be immersed with this fire. And the fire of Adonai, from the glory, from the kavod, it leaped out and it came upon the sacrifices, the korbanot, and the korbanot. All of a sudden, the fire became physical fire. And from then on, that fire was never to go out. Even in the night, all day long and all night long, there was always a fire, a continual fire burning on the altar. And this is the first time it happens. This is the first dedication, the first time that the glory came and started the sacrificial system there. And so it's important for us to know that the first Hanukkah, that the fire came down as Aaron and the priest were offering korbanot, and all of a sudden it came upon the altar. Now go to chapter 5. Again, we're just doing an overview of this. This is the Nadab and Abihu, or Avihu in Hebrew, and what is their sin? It says there that Nadab and Abihu each took their censers. They were bringing incense before Adonai. And what a censer was a little, like a little bowl, and with a little wire to it, or a little golden chain. And what they would do is they would cense. and they would get incense also and put it on a golden altar. And there was an exact recipe. Adonai gave a recipe for the incense, if you remember. And he said, this is the recipe for bringing incense to me. And he said, do not let anybody use this kind of incense for themselves. Now, many of us burn incense. And you have incense in the house or different kinds of incense. And we could burn any kind of incense except the recipe that Adonai gave. And so here comes two priests, the two of the four sons of Aaron, the high priest, and they come and they want to bring incense. But we have a problem here because it says that they presented unlawful fire before Yahweh. Some translations say strange fire, strange. They lit the fire and they brought the incense, and something was wrong here. One of the things that we need to know is that when Adonai tells us to do something, and this is going to kind of go into the idea of even food, what we eat or what we don't eat. It goes into every part of our life. Remember what I said to the young people. Adonai is concerned about every part of our life. There's not one part of our life. See, today we separate the religious and the secular. We have a religious life. People live religious lives. Religion means devotion, devoted to something, devotee in another language. They have religion. They have these do's and don'ts. And we're talking about the world religions. We're talking about all the Christian religions, all the cults. Everybody has religion. But most people, they keep their religion in a box. In fact, most people keep their religion in little boxes called church buildings or synagogues. Or this is not where we keep our faith. Our faith is actually everywhere in our lives, where you go to work, where you go to school, whatever we do, our shopping, wherever we're at, we take our faith, and our faith always comes with us. Us and our faith always go together. But some people have a religious life and they have a secular life, and never the twain shall meet. Torah is involved with everything. In fact, what Torah does, it gets your faith and your secular life, and it brings it together. And then it says this has to be separate, set apart from them and from them. You have to be different than the religious people. You have to be different than the secular people. We have to be set apart, which means that our faith and our daily life has to be different. We must be a different people. Be ye holy as I am holy, we saw. Think of this. Adonai is holy. We know he is holy. We know he's set apart. But watch what he tells you. He says, you all, which is in the Hebrew comes out, you all be holy in the same way that I am holy. That's a tall order. That's an impossible order. No, it's not. He wants us to be that set apart. Now, notice what he's not saying. Always remember, when he says something, always notice what he's not saying. He's not saying, be sinless as I am sinless. He's not telling you. That would be an impossible order. No one could do that. But remember, holiness, the opposite of holiness is not sin. The opposite of holiness is not sin. The opposite of holiness is the common. What's common? What's regular? What regular people do? What common people do? Adonai did not call us to be a common people we saw last week. He called us to be a set-apart people. Be holy as I am holy. I am set apart. Therefore, I want you to be set apart. And in every area of our life, he wants us to be set apart. And so over here, he tells He had already told Aaron and his sons, this is my incense. This is the fire I want you. Do not get a different fire. Do not change the recipe. This is exactly what I want. But they offered strange fire before Adonai, unauthorized fire that Adonai had said no to. It wasn't in accordance with Adonai's command, with his mishpatim, his hukim. And so what happened? The fire of Adonai now comes and consumes them, and they die. They die. And they die because they did something wrong. Now, what did they do wrong? By the way, after that, there's a couple of teachings there on what happens to their bodies. And those of, we teach Tahara here. We practice Tahara. We do our own funerals here. When one of our brothers goes home, we take care of our brothers. When our sisters go home, our sisters take care of our sisters. We prepare the bodies for burial ourselves. And this is something that's taught in Scripture. This is one of those areas. And you could look at that. But why? What happened? What did they do? Go with me to verse 8. Yahweh spoke to Aaron, and he said, when you come to the tent of meeting, you and your sons with you, do not take strong drink or wine, then you will not die. This is a perpetual law for all your descendants. So here we have a hint. Here we have a hint of what happened. Here, these two brothers must have taken wine or strong drink in the Noah sort of way, where they got drunk. And because they was their turn to offer the incense, guess what happened? They must have come into the sanctuary drunk. And when they offered the incense, they either got the wrong kind of incense or did it in the wrong manner. And Adonai, now this, think of this. This is the price that the, excuse me, this is the price that these two men, priests, sons of Aaron, not just anybody, but sons of Aaron, had to pay for not doing exactly what Adonai has to say. And sometimes today we say, whew, good thing we live in an age of grace. That's, in fact, if you say that for something like this, then you haven't understood grace at all. Because that's not what grace teaches. And we'll look at that later. And so these two sons died for not observing what Adonai says. You know, today sometimes with that, sometimes what I call hyper grace teaching that goes through many congregations, sometimes I have that idea that people use it for their convenience. And so here we see that exact observance is what Adonai is looking for. Well, let's go to our main teaching here. Let's see if there's anything else. Yes, the controversy on food. Once again, we are confronted with three aspects when it comes to food. In many studies that I have done, is I get the three aspects. I always judge everything through these three filters. The Christian filter, the rabbinic filter, and the biblical, or what we would call the Mosaic filter. These are three filters that you could use always to look at some of these things that are controversial, like food. And we've done this in many other areas. What are the biblical protocols when it comes to food? The mishpatim, the hukim, that are called statutes or or decrees. Different Bibles use different words for those two Hebrew words. What are the biblical protocols? The biblical protocols that we're going to study today are instructions, are what we may eat and what we may not eat, period. Scripture gives us instructions, gives us protocols. This is what you may eat. This is what you will not eat. Now, the rabbinic have what they call halakha. The word halakha is actually a very important word. Everybody has halakha. Halakha is the way you walk. And the way you walk your faith out. The way a congregation walks their faith out. Halakha means to walk. So, the rabbinic halakha has complex laws of diet called kashrut. Complex, very complex, as to what you may eat or what you may not eat. For example, and we're going to talk about this more, but just for example, in some rabbinic homes, some Orthodox homes, they actually have two kitchens. One kitchen is a dairy kitchen and one kitchen is a meat kitchen. And they have dairy plates and meat plates. And you can't eat. Say you ate a piece of cheese, and you take that plate and you wash it. You wash it for an hour. According to kashrut, you can't eat now a piece of meat on it, because what if a little piece of cheese was left over, and now you're eating cheese and meat together, which is a rabbinic taboo. And so rabbinic halakha has complex that gets into the part of what we call legalism. The Pharisees, as we're going to see, were full of this halakha. Now, the Christians have what they call Christian liberty. Everything can be edible. You could eat whatever you want. If you don't want to eat that, don't eat it. If you want to eat this, whatever. So we have three filters, three ways of looking at food. Do we use the biblical protocols? Do we use the rabbinic halakha? Or do we use the Christian liberty? I use the biblical protocols. And I'm going to show you why you should too, in case you are one or someone's listening to us over the internet that follows rabbinic or Christian halakha. Like I said, there's this and there's this, and there's always the balance. And I believe the biblical protocols are the balance, and I want to give you some evidences for that to see what you think and put these in your corner and see what you guys come up with. The clean, Leviticus 12:1, what does it say? Speak unto the children of Israel and say, these are the beasts which ye shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. So according to Leviticus 11:2, these are the animals that you may eat. Now, there's two words that every one of us needs to learn here. The clean in Hebrew is tahor. Everybody say with me, tahor. Tahor. It means untarnished. Something that is tahor is untarnished. Something that is tahor is unpolluted. There's no pollution. You know, you can't just go down to the river here and get a cup of water and drink it, because the river is not tahor. It is tamai. It is tahor, means untarnished, unpolluted, acceptable. Something that is tahor is acceptable. Another word that I like to use is presentable. Tahor means presentable. Tamai, unclean, is tamai. Say with me, tamai. Tamai is something that is impure, something that is defiled, not acceptable, not presentable, not presentable. Now, you know, there's something about Adonai that is different from what most people think. most of us, Adonai accepts us as we are. Like I said from Romans, while we were yet sinners, Messiah died for us. Yet Messiah died for sinners. We could come to him as we are. We could come in our tamai state. Every one of us came tamai to Adonai. Every one of us was tamai. We were impure. We were defiled. We were not acceptable to him. But by this is where true grace comes in. By his grace, he came where we were, and he redeemed us. He bought us out. But he didn't expect us to stay that way. Here's the problem. Most people, when they come to Adonai, they come, oh, he forgives me of my sins. So therefore, I got my fire insurance now. And they think that they could go and live the way they want to, still unclean, still all that. In fact, the waters of baptism are to immerse you so you could die in Messiah and be raised up in Messiah, a new creature. We are a new creature. The old has gone. And it is he who cleans us. But it is the power of the Holy Spirit, what we call sanctification, that is that continual cleaning on a daily basis. And let me tell you, he's going to clean us until the day we go home to be with him. It's a continual process. But it's something we must allow him to do. And the idea of food and other things are ways of teaching us that and bringing us to that state of holiness. He is a holy Elohim. And he cares about what you eat like he cares about what he accepts. Tahor tamai. These are two things that every one of us must know in reference to animals. Not in reference to anything else, in reference to animals and food from animals. Again, people have gone overboard. Many people go overboard on this. Rabbinic halakha goes overboard. And a lot of stuff are considered tamai that are not tamai. The protocols of tahor and tamai. The animals that are called clean and those animals that are called unclean. We're talking about animals, only animals. Clean animals are foodable. What? Have you heard that word before? Foodable? I guess that I meant to say edible, right? Clean animals are foodable. Unclean animals are not foodable. They are unfoodable. And it's important to put it that way because I want to make sure that we all know that clean animals are food. Unclean animals are not food. They're not considered food. Just like, in fact, we could go back to Genesis. And remember, Adonai tells Adam, our father, you may eat of all the trees and their roots, their berries, their seeds, seed-bearing plants, the leaves, all this. From the garden to Noah's time, they were vegetarians. There was vegetarians. But I'm going to tell you something. They were told they could eat of all the leaves, all the seeds, all those things. They could to eat of all of them. But that they eat of all of them? Were all the plants foodable? No. No, a lot of the plants were unfoodable. How many have ever eaten poison ivy? Please don't. Poison ivy is not food. Yeah, it's a plant. Just because you're a vegetarian or a vegan, don't eat poison ivy. Don't eat others. There's a lot of food, you go out into the into the mountains and you say, oh, I need some vitamin D. I need some vitamin D. I think I'll go look for mushrooms. Just don't go eat all the mushrooms you find, because you might not come down the mountain. And so it's important that we know that even in plants, even in vegetables, even in all these things, there's food, and some of them are not food. They'll kill you. Food is what will give us nourishment. Food is what helps us live. We are what we eat. And so the same thing with animals. There are animals that are food. There are animals that are not food. And a lot of people say, well, doesn't Paul say, eat everything and whatever you eat, it's okay? Yeah, food. But remember, he's not talking about animals that are not food. Always keep that in the back of your mind. Now, keeping kosher is only about animals as food and sacrifice. When people use the word kosher, and we'll look at that from the Hebrew point of view, but when people say, oh, I keep kosher, remember, it's only about animals as food and sacrifice. Kosher is only about animals. It's not about anything else. In fact, some people have, is this wine kosher? Notice that for Passover, there's a sign that says, kosher wine for Passover. You could only have kosher. Wait, there's no such thing as kosher and unkosher wine, because it's not an animal. Now, what they're talking about is who prepared it. Was it prepared by a Gentile? Gentile wines are not kosher. Kosher wines are only those wines that are prepared. Well, wait a second. That has nothing to do with eating and all that. That's just rabbinic halakha. That's overflow. That's going overboard. Now, here's where it starts. Here's where it starts. Noah, in Genesis 7:2, of every clean, say, tahor. Of every tahor animal, beast, you shall take to thee, to yourself, by sevens, the male and the female. And of the animals that are not clean, by two, the male and the female, that are lo tahor. There's tahor and lo tahor. There's clean and unclean, lo tahor. Now watch this. When you see the Sunday school pictures of the ark, everything goes 2 by 2. They didn't read their Torah because it wasn't 2 by 2. Yes, it was 2 by 2 of the unclean animals, but it was 7 pairs of the clean. It has to be 7 pairs of the clean. So there was 14 from the sheep, 14 from the goats, 14 from the cows, 14 from the chicken, 14. But only 2, the pig and all those animals that are unclean, the rabbit, the horse, the dog, the cat, only 2 of each. Now why? Because after the flood, now remember, this is before Moses. This is before the writing of the Torah. Adonai has given us Torah instructions from the beginning. The first Torah taught, the first instruction that Adonai gave us is be fruitful and multiply. He gave that to our father and mother, Adam and Eve. Be fruitful and multiply. That's a Torah taught. That's an instruction. That's Torah. He also said, you will work 6 days. On the 7th day, it's a day of rest. That was given to Adam. That's a Torah taught. That's an instruction. Adonai gave instructions about sacrifice from the beginning to Adam. We saw that all of a sudden we have Cain and Abel. Cain and Havel we saw last week. And we saw that Havel comes with korbanot of mincha, in a korbanot of the first fruits of the lamb. And Cain comes only with a korbanot of a mincha. And some of the mincha, not the best mincha, but just some of it. And Adonai says he looked with favor, with grace, by the way, with grace upon Havel. But it says he turned his face away from Cain because he didn't come with a heart of giving, whereas Havel came with a heart of giving. And so sacrifice took place right after the expulsion of the garden. Sacrifice, wait a second, that's not Mosaic, that's Torah. Sacrifice is Torah. Adonai did the first sacrifice, if you remember, by killing a lamb and covering Adam and Chava. Now, what were the sacrifices? What were the clean and unclean animals for sacrifice? After the flood, then Noah built an altar to Yahweh, and choosing from all the clean animals and all the clean birds, he presented Ola on the altar. You see, remember we studied about Ola last week? Ola wasn't invented by Moses. It's not a Jewish thing. It's not an Israelite thing. It's not Mosaic. It is Adonai. And so Adonai, where did Noah learn about korbanot? Where did Noah learn about altars? Of course, the altar of Yahweh, where he sacrificed the first animal, the altar of Havel, where he sacrificed. This is all from the beginning. It's not something that the law now comes through Moses. No. But also for food. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant. But remember what I said. Yeah, I give you all moving things, but not all moving things are food. Just like not all the green plants were food. Some of those green plants were not food. And yeah, he gave them all to you. So always remember that when someone will try to attack you in that area. Now, this is the Torah, this is the instruction of the animals and of the fowl and of every living creature that moves in the water and of every creature that creeps on the earth. To make a difference between the clean and the unclean. Bein chatamai uvein chatachod. To make a difference between the unclean and the clean. And between the beast or the animal that may be eaten and the beast, the animal, that may not be eaten. Food and non-food. Some animals are foodable, other animals are unfoodable. They are not edible. You must not eat them. Why? Because of their nature. Adonai has provided a nature. Now, I love my vacuum cleaner. My vacuum cleaner cleans. It has a little thing that you put water in there, and it cleans, and all of a sudden the water, after you vacuum, you look at that thing, and boy, man, there's a lot of junk in there. Now, I like the cup because it's perfect for water. Now, I'm not going to get that vacuum cleaner cup that is used and go wash it and even drink water. I'm not going to do that. The vacuum cleaner has its place. Unclean animals have their place. If you notice all unclean animals, there's something about unclean animals that is important for you to always note. They are the cleaner uppers of the environment. Unclean animals are the cleaner uppers of the environment. They're the ones that eat anything, like Christian liberty, I guess. They eat anything. They will clean up, whether it's the birds, the vultures, the hawks, if you eat something dead, you are unclean because you become what you are. And so unclean animals eat anything alive or dead, and they are the vacuum cleaners of the sea. Adonai made those lobsters and those shrimp to clean up the ocean. If we didn't have no lobsters and shrimp and all those animals in the sea, our seas would be so polluted. They're polluted. But it's these animals, the bottom feeders, the hawks, the ravens, all these animals, the pig. There's nothing wrong with having a pig. In fact, in Israel, they had pigs. What is the purpose of the pig? It's to eat everything. In fact, every restaurant should have a pig behind it so that they could throw everything to the pigs. That's their job. That's their purpose. Their purpose is not to be eaten by man. Their purpose is to serve man. And so we need to make sure we have that distinction. Now, what does kosher mean? The word kosher comes from the word kasher in Hebrew, which means something that is fit or proper. This is proper to do. This is improper. So if you want to use the word kosher, remember, that's a big general thing. We're not talking about the hor tamai. We're talking about something general. It doesn't have to be with food, with, whatever. The term derives not from the Bible, but from post-biblical rabbinic theology. The word kosher is used in the Jewish community to mean clean foods, but also anything acceptable to Adonai. Kosher foods are tahor. Something that is kosher is tahor. But there's some foods that are not tahor, but they are still considered kosher. The clean kosher animals include cows, sheep, goats, and deer. Clean kosher birds include chicken, turkey, geese, ducks, doves. Clean kosher seafood includes salmon, trout, and other fish with fins and scales. So these are the animals that he says we could eat. And here in Leviticus 11, you could go through it during the week and study that more closely. Unclean animals include pigs, horses, camels, rats, cats, dogs, snakes, raccoons, squirrels, and most insects. Unclean birds include eagles, sparrows, hawks, bats, crows. Unclean seafoods includes catfish, sharks, shrimp, eel, octopus, squid, shellfish, lobster, crabs, whales. So these are the animals that Adonai says, I don't want you to eat these. Now, in most cultures, animals from here are eaten. In fact, some here might include as part of their diet some of these. In fact, pigs are probably the most included in Christian diets, in secular diets, although they're not called pigs. They're called what? Pork and ham and bacon and all those things. Some people eat horses and some of these things, but these are what we may not eat. This is not food. A pig is not food. So when you eat that bacon, you're not eating food. You're eating non-food. It's not food. Pigs are not foodable. When you eat catfish or you eat shrimp, have a shrimp cocktail, or lobster. If you eat lobster, you're not eating food. You're eating something that Adonai considers non-food. Remember, it's not me who considers it non-food. It's Adonai who considers it non-food. And of course, of the insects, these are insects that you could eat. We could eat grasshoppers. And can you imagine a lot of people say, but they'll eat bacon, but they don't want to eat grasshoppers. Adonai says you can eat grasshoppers, locusts, crickets. Insects that do not fly and hop are unclean. Please don't eat cucarachas also. Of course, creeping things, caterpillars, worms, snakes, lizards, chameleons, snails, all that. Escargot. Please don't go and eat some escargot. Frogs, toads, reptiles, marine animals. These are non-edible. Now, Yeshua knew these biblical Mosaic dietary laws and obeyed them. Paul knew and obeyed them. Peter knew and obeyed them all their lives. All the life of Yeshua and the apostles, they knew these. But often, Yeshua came in conflict with what is called the traditions of the elders. The tradition of the elders is 2 + 2 = 5. The tradition of Orthodox Judaism today is 2 + 2 = 5. By the way, the Christian in Christianity is 2 + 2 = 3. 2 + 2 = 3. But we must know that 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 will always equal 4. Not 5, not 3. So we cannot add or take away. Torah tells us, do not add to my Torah. Do not take away from my Torah. 4 times Adonai tells us in Tanakh not to add or take away. But they add it. This is known again as rabbinical kosher or rabbinical halakha. And I'm not trying to come against anybody. I'm just trying to say this is not what Adonai said. This is not what Adonai says. This is what Adonai says. I don't want to seem like if I'm, trying to be anti-something, anti-Christian or anti-Jewish. I don't want to be either. I want to be pro-Torah, pro-Moses. We must be Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic, all those 3 things. We want to follow Moses, we want to follow Messiah, and we want to follow the apostles. Those are the 3 things that a believer in today's covenant relationship with Adonai, because we remember, we're under the new covenant. But the new covenant doesn't take away the first covenant. It just allows us to do it and to follow it only with his sanctions, not with the additions or the subtractions. Most people that follow rabbinic halakha are actually not following what Adonai wants to do today. Now, let's go to Mark 7:19. And I'm going to show you something here that is very important because according to most teaching today, Yeshua made all food clean. And there's teachings going around saying that Yeshua made all foods clean, so now we could eat whatever we want. But remember what we have said, or I'm going to say here in a little while, is that if you think that pig is okay to eat, then logically you must say, so is dog, so is cat, so is this one and that one, because we need to follow a pattern, a biblical pattern. If Adonai says this group is unclean, then the whole group is unclean. If Adonai says this group is clean, then the whole group is clean. But who am I to say, well, it's almost like we all have a bar. We all have this bar, kosher bar. And in this kosher bar, what's kosher to you, and today we say, oh, that's kosher to you, it's not kosher to me. Oh, that's not kosher to you, oh, it's kosher to me. You know, it's almost like we are the center of the universe. Let me tell you something, a secret. Well, it's no secret, but we are not the center of the universe. Adonai is. We have no authority to change his word. Yeshua did not change his word. The apostles did not change his word. They followed his word. And I'm going to show you how Yeshua and the apostles all followed the Tahor Tamai regulations. And if they did, I should. And a lot of people say, well, Paul, Mr. Grace, he allows us. We're going to see what that says. Let's go to Mark 7:19. And by the way, it's interesting that this scripture presentation has nothing to do with clean and unclean animals. Has nothing to do with unclean animals. But this is used by people to say that he made all foods clean. The Pharisees, let's go to verse 1. The Pharisees and some scribes who had come down from Jerusalem gathered around him. And they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with unclean hands. That is, without washing them. Now, kids, before you go to eat, what does mom say? Go wash your hands. Uh-oh. Controversy. Go wash your hands. And so one of the most important things is that every one of us should wash our hands before we eat, right? We should wash our hands before we eat. Why? Because we're always touching things. You know, we're always handling the door. You know, we go to the bathroom. We do all these things. And our hands are unclean. I'm in agreement with that. So we go and what do? Soap and water and wash our hands. We always wash our hands. But this is not what this is talking about. This is not hygienic washing of the hands that the Pharisees are talking about. It's the ritual, a ritual that is an addition. It is a tradition. It is a minchag, a takanot, something that is not a biblical mishpatim or hukim. So what is this about? After you hygienically washed your hands, and if you go to Israel, when you go eat in the restaurant, there will usually be a bronze or brass water receptacle there and in a pitcher. And what you're supposed to do is put your hand like this, get the pitcher, and just let a little bit of water flow, and then it just goes down the elbow. Then you do the same thing, and you do that ritually. That's washing your hands in halakha. It's not hygienic washing your hands. It's ritual washing their hands. So the apostles, I'm sure they washed their hands, and they were going to eat. But they didn't do it the Pharisee way. They didn't do it with the addition, with the added on. Torah says nothing about that. But the apostles, the disciples of Yeshua, didn't do it that way. They didn't wash their hands. For the Pharisees and the Jews in general follow the tradition of the elders. 2 plus 2 equals 5. Additions. They not only follow the written word, but they have a hybrid religion, which is the written word plus what the elders say, the additions of the elders. What since the time of Jeremiah, in fact, go with me real fast to Jeremiah. And go with me to Jeremiah. I believe, what was that, chapter 11? No, chapter 8. Chapter 8. And watch in Jeremiah's time. How dare you say, Adonai says to the wise, how dare you say to the Pharisees, to the scribes, we are wise, and we possess the Torah of Yahweh. But look how it has been falsified by the lying pen of the scribes. The wise, the sages, shall be shammed, caught out, confounded. Look how they have rejected the word of Yahweh. So what use is their wisdom to them? A lot of people say, oh, the sages, oh, they're so wise, the sages. But Adonai is against them. And look, they have falsified the word of Adonai. By their lying pen, they've added and subtracted also. They've rejected, according to Adonai, the word. And so they follow these traditions that have grown up throughout the years. And never eat without washing their arms as far as the elbow. And on returning from the marketplace, they never eat without first sprinkling themselves. And so one of the things that they did, and the worst of this, that they would have mikvot or baptistries in their house, and when they came from the marketplace, and if the shadow of an unbeliever fell on you, you would have to go get baptized, go through mikvah before you went in the house and ate and do all that. That's not what Torah says. It doesn't say that. Those are additions. And so they do these things, these rituals. There are also many other observances which have been handed down to them concerning the washing of cups and pots and bronze dishes. Has nothing to do with Torah. These are additional observances. So these Pharisees and scribes asked Yeshua, why why do your disciples not respect the tradition of the elders? Now, Yeshua is going to go on to say in another time, be careful with the leaven of the Pharisees, which is their teaching. Yeshua called it leaven. Now, Paul calls it, I guess dung is a nice word. That's what Paul calls it. And so, according to Yeshua and Paul, the teaching of the elders is not to be followed. And then it goes on to say here, but to eat with food with unclean hands, he answers that it was you hypocrites that Isaiah, and this is Isaiah 29:13, by the way, so rightly prophesied in this passage of Scripture. This people honors me only with lip service, while their hearts are far from me. The worship they offer me is worthless. The doctrines they teach are only human regulations. Jeremiah, Isaiah, the prophets saw the sham of these people. And Yeshua is not a follower of the traditions of the elders. Yeshua is a follower of Torah. Yeshua is a follower of Tanakh. I should follow Torah. I should follow Tanakh. And you should too. Now, let's go on. You put the commandment of Elohim, you put aside the commandment of Elohim to cling to human traditions. By the way, Matthew 15, 1 through 9 goes deeper in some of these aspects. It's the same story, but he sees it from a different angle. You put aside the commandment of Elohim to cling to human traditions. And he said to them, how ingeniously you get around the commandment of Elohim in order to preserve your own tradition. And that's where he says, Torah says, honor your father and your mother. But remember, korban. If you are a rich man and you put your riches in the temple as korban, then you could tell your father and mother, I can't help you because my money is korban. But once your father and mother die, then you could get your korban and bring it from the temple, and then you could use it to live a lavish lifestyle. That's hypocrisy, and Yeshua caught him on that, and in Matthew that comes out even more. Then he goes on to say, in this way you make Elohim's word null and void for the sake of your tradition, which you have handed down, and you do many other things like this. I'm going to say something here that I hope I'm not trying to come against you, but please understand this. The Mishnah and the Talmud are these other observances. What's in the Mishnah, what's in the Talmud is what has been written down. By the way, the Mishnah and the Talmud Mishnah was written 200 years in the Common Era. The Talmud in the Middle Ages. So those are commentaries on commentaries on commentaries on the tradition of the elders. But Yeshua already put the tradition of the elders aside as being null and void. They've made the word of Elohim null and void for the sake of tradition. So Yeshua makes their traditions and their words null and void for the sake of Torah. Now, I'm going to side with Yeshua. I don't know about you. You could side with whoever you want, but we must side with Yeshua. And he called the people again to him in verse 14 and said, listen to me, all of you, and understand. Nothing that goes in the mouth from the outside can make a person unclean. It is the things that come out of a man that make him unclean. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear this. Perfect point. The whole thing about clean and unclean, in fact, remember, it's not about food. They're talking about a tradition. And it is true that what makes people unclean is really not what goes in the mouth. It's what comes out. Unclean. Gossip is unclean. Coming against a brother, coming against a sister, what we talk, lashon hara, in Hebrew it's called lashon hara, the evil tongue. Hebrew calls it lashon hara. In fact, it'd be better for the tongue to be cut out and enter heaven without a tongue, Yeshua says. James, Yaakov says almost the same thing. But then, watch what it says. Over here. When he had gone back into the house, away from the crowd, his disciples questioned him about the parable. About what parable? About the clean and unclean, what comes in the mouth goes out of the mouth. Remember, now he uses that as a parable. That's a parable now. Now, what's a parable? What's a parable? If you have one bull next to another bull, what do you have? A pair of bulls. And so a parable is something that looks like the other. Like this bull looks like this bull, so you have a parable. So this story of clean and unclean looks like this thing of it's not what goes in the mouth, it's what comes out of the mouth that isn't clean. So they asked him about that parable in verse 17. He said to them, Do you not understand either? In Spanish, we would probably say tontos. Do you not understand either? Can you not see that whatever goes into a man from the outside cannot make him unclean? Because it does not go into his heart, but through his stomach and passes into the sewer. Now, the next verse, underline it, put it in yellow, put a star next to it, because he says in the English Bibles, thus he pronounced all foods clean. Now, the New American Standard, this is the New American Standard, the NIV, the New Jerusalem Bible, the Amplified, the New Living Translation. Watch what all translations say this. Thus he declared all foods clean. Because it does not go into his heart, but into his stomach and is eliminated. Thus he declared all foods clean. And it's interesting that all of them put it in parentheses. NIV, for it doesn't go into the heart, but into the stomach, and then out of the body. In saying this, Yeshua, Jesus, declared all foods clean. The Jerusalem Bible says, by saying this, he showed that every kind of food is acceptable. That's not the translation. Thus he was making and declaring all foods ceremonially clean. The Amplified, remember, the Amplified amplifies. Ceremony, that's not in the scripture. Clean, that is abolishing the ceremonial distinctions of the Levitical law. This is an interpretation. That's why please be careful with the Amplified Bible. A lot of people like it, but the Amplified Bible actually amplifies the authors rather than the word. And so be careful with the Amplified Bible. Because watch what it says. Now, a lot of people in a lot of churches have studied the English Bible from the King James, and the King James says the same thing. So the English-speaking world have always had this. In saying this, Yeshua declared all foods clean. So therefore, where does the all foods clean come from? From the translations. But what does the Greek say? The Greek says, because it entered not into his heart, but into his belly, and goes out into the sewer, eliminating the food. Here's that word, eliminating, katharizon, pantata, bromata. Bromata is the word for food, broma. Anything in medicine, and if you have doctors or nurses that have to do with has to do with the stomach or problems with the stomach. Bromata. Katharizon, pantata, bromata. It goes into the sewer, eliminating the food. This here, katharizon, pantata, bromata, is what is used. Thus he declared all foods clean. That's not what the Greek says. The first translators translated this, not eliminating the food as they should have, but they translated it, making all foods clean. So the Greek New Testament does not say that Yeshua made all food clean, especially what the Amplified says. What the Greek New Testament says, that after it goes into the sewer, the body and eliminates the food. The food is eliminated. It's gone. Se fue. If Yeshua then made all meat clean, tahor, then you can not only eat pig, lobster, shrimp, and so on, but you can also eat dog, cat, horse, monkey, bats, and so on. Any of you here were in the military, Vietnam, Philippines, and then Far East. Hey sailor, barbecue, come here, have barbecue. Geraldo is Geraldo here? Geraldo's not here. Dr. C's not here he's not here. He would say the same thing. He's from the Philippines. Or they give you monkey meat, and it's monkey meat. And you go there, and you think it's barbecue, and you take that barbecue, and you're eating it, and all the veteranos, the guys that have been there before, are all laughing because now you, as a young sailor, are eating monkey meat. They sell monkey meat, and they have you ever heard this before? In usually the Far East, China, all those places, if it has 4 legs and it's not a table, they'll eat it. If it has wings and it's not an airplane, they'll eat it. If it has fins and it's not a ship, submarine, they'll eat it. What's your kosher level? What do you eat? Hopefully, after today, you might reanalyze your kosher level, because every one of us has a kosher level. Every one of us has a kosher level. And one of the hardest things when you come into Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic, true apostolic faith and doctrine, one of the things is you have to do is say, wait a second, I need to reanalyze. You know that I have family and friends that have said, we would love, to be part of the congregation, we thank Adonai that we are Jewish, and we thank Adonai but the kosher level, we cannot, they still like their ham sandwiches. They still like their bacon. They still like their lobster. And it's sad, and I don't want it to be that this is what will be. Are you going to follow Torah? This should not be what you follow Torah or not follow Torah. This should be what we should follow Adonai. Adonai is the one that gave us the Torah, not Moses. This is not a Jewish thing, by the way. This is not a Jewish thing. This is for the world. This is for the world. In fact, it was Noah. How many are descendant of Noah? And, through one of his 3 sons, right? Larry, Moore, Curly. Which one of those are you descended from? But every one of us is a descendant of Noah. Noah kept kosher. And if he did, I'm sure every one of us should. Abraham kept kosher. Abraham kept Torah. Yeshua kept Torah. Did Yeshua not declare all foods clean? No. Do not imagine that I have come to abolish the Torah and the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to complete them. In truth, I tell you, heaven and earth shall in truth, I tell you, till heaven and earth disappear, not one yod, not one dot, nor one little stroke is to disappear from the Torah until all its purpose is achieved. Let me ask you a question. Has heaven and earth disappeared? It was still here this morning when I woke up. Until then. Now, can you imagine when this heaven and this earth disappear? When this heaven and this earth disappear, and we go into the new heaven, new earth, we're not going to have to worry about none of this. We are going to be in the new Jerusalem, and we don't have to worry. But until then, the Torah is something that needs to be followed. Therefore, anyone who infringes even one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be considered least in the kingdom of heaven. But the person who keeps them and teaches them will be considered great in the kingdom of heaven. Look at this. One of these commandments in Torah, in the prophets, in the Tanakh, and of course with the commandments of Yeshua. Anyone who infringes even the least commandment. What's the least commandment? Think of these food commandments. Don't eat bacon. Well, is that a least? Let's put that as the least commandment. Every so often, no matter what, every one of you could have a bag of chicharrones, cracklins. Oh, it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. I'm driving, and you stop by the 7-Eleven store. You get you a Coke. You get your little bag of chicharrones. And it's not that big of a deal. Well, to Adonai, it's a big deal because what does he say? Therefore, anyone who infringes even one of the least of these commandments and teaches others, oh yeah, you could have whatever you want. No, but whoever keeps them and teaches them. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be called least in the kingdom of heaven. I want to be called great in the kingdom of heaven. 1 Corinthians 3:10 and following, I wish I could go into that. There's 1 Corinthians 3:10 and following. Go ahead and study it. It's important for us to really look at these things. One of the centurions of the Italic cohort stationed in Caesarea was called Cornelius. Let's go to Acts 10:1. And I'm losing time, so I have to go a little fast on this. And his whole household were devout and feared Elohim. He was a proselyte. And he gave generously to Jewish causes and prayed constantly to Elohim. And so over here we have, Acts 10:1. And in Acts 10:1, most people have this idea that this is another place where Adonai tells Peter here, kill and eat. And of course, Peter says, I have never eaten anything unclean. Now think of this. This is about 10 years after, about 8 to 10 years after the death and resurrection of Yeshua. So for 10 years, Peter has been keeping kosher. And now Adonai tells him, kill and eat. 3 times he says, kill and eat. And Peter says no. And then the sheet went up to heaven and it was over. He comes up to Cornelius' house. And he did not eat unclean foods. But when he comes to the house next day, they came, and let's go to verse 27. He comes to Cornelius' house, and Cornelius bows down to him and says, don't bow down to me, I'm just a man. Verse 27, talking together, they went in to meet the people assembled. And Peter said to them, you know it is forbidden for Jews to mix with people of another race and visit them. It's forbidden for Jews to visit people of another race or visit them. But Elohim made it clear to me that I am not to call anyone profane or unclean. So this coming down of unclean animals had nothing to do with eating unclean animals. That was an illustration to Peter of not animals, but of people. That I should call no man unclean. And so Peter comes, Peter would have had a reluctance to go into their house because you could not eat with a pagan. You could not eat with a Gentile. Why? Because of uncleanness. Things that they do are unclean. What do Gentiles do? They have idols. Idols are unclean and they make you unclean. They eat blood. Blood makes you unclean. They have fornication, which is incest and those ideas of really bad, doing bad stuff. And they'll eat any kind of food. They'll eat roadkill or anything like that. So these are 4 things that Gentiles do that Israel considers unclean, and you cannot go into anyone's house if they observe these 4 things. You cannot eat with people if they do these 4 things. These are 4 biggies. Before you eat with someone, before you go to someone's house, these are 4 things. How would it be to you if you'd go to someone's house and they have Buddhas everywhere and all kinds of statues and even today Jesuses and Kachina dolls and Coco Pallies and all this kind of stuff? Would you feel comfortable? No, you could even feel the atmosphere of uncleanness and demonic stuff. What if someone serves you blood sausage? Would you eat it? No. What if someone's living with his sister, is married to his sister or is married to his daughter? You couldn't do that. What if somebody just went down the road and they saw a deer, a clean animal, and it had been hit by a car or had been strangled, and someone strangled it, and they put it? No, those are 4 things that you would say, no, I cannot be invited to your house for those 4 things. And so these are 4 things that probably Cornelius before, now remember, he was a God-fearer now, so all those things he had gone out, but to many Jews, even an ex-pagan was kind of considered a little bit taboo. But over here, I have been told not to call anyone unclean or profane anymore. So he was able to come by Adonai's opening, giving him this example for him to come. Acts 24:14. Paul is before the governor, and he has people, Jewish people, Pharisees coming against him, and he says, admit this, and admit that. And Paul says, no, what I do admit to you is this. It is according to the way, Haderech, which the Jews, described as a sect or as a cult, that I worship the Elohim of my ancestors. Now watch this, underline this. Retaining my belief in all points of the Torah and in what is written in the prophets. That right there, what did Yeshua say? I did not come to destroy. If you even the least, I'm against you. Paul says, I'm not following anything except what my fathers taught me. I worship the Elohim of my ancestors, retaining my belief in all points of the Torah and what is written in the prophets. Paul was a Torah observer, like Yeshua. And I hold the same hope in Elohim as they do, that there will be a resurrection of the upright and the wicked. In these things, I, as much as they, talking about the Jews, do my best to keep a clear conscience at all times before Elohim and everyone. After several years, he tells them, I came to Jerusalem, and then he goes on, making offerings, korbanot. Whoops, whoa, stop right there. What? Wait a second. I thought Yeshua died, and when Yeshua died, no more sacrifices. We see Paul twice sacrificing and giving korbanot. Over here, he admits it in front of the Jews, in front of the Roman governor. After several years, I came to Jerusalem and to the temple to make offerings, korbanot. It was in connection with these that they found me in the temple. I had been purified. In other words, he had gone through the mikvah service. He had come and offered the sacrifice of sin, the communion sacrifice, the mincha, the ola. He had done those korbanot. This is Paul at the end of his life. If Paul could do it, the only reason we don't sacrifice today is not because Yeshua died, but because there's no temple. And I want to tell you, when the temple is rebuilt, there's going to be sacrifices. In the millennial temple, there's going to be sacrifices. In fact, Yeshua is going to be in charge of the sin sacrifice, the olah, the chatat, and all those that we studied last week. Yeshua is going to do them as the high priest after Melchizedek. The temple's going to be built, Ezekiel 40, 45, and on. And everything's going to be done. Torah is going to be observed. In the millennium, the world is going to be kosher. The whole world. Nobody in the millennium is going to eat pig. Think of it. No more bacon, ham sandwiches in the millennium. Why? Because the word of Adonai is going to come forth out of Jerusalem. Out of Sion will come Torah. So if in the past and in the future, Yeshua, Paul, if they did it, who has the authority to say you could eat whatever you want, now we're in grace? Whoever says that is wrong. And we need to go back to what Adonai says. Now, I'm not talking about rabbinical kosher. Biblical kosher or tachor is a teaching of Torah as regards clean and unclean animals. Rabbinical kosher is the teaching of men as regards to meats, wine, and other non-kosher to my situations, the jalapeno. What does the jalapeno have to do with clean and unclean foods? I went out to eat with a rabbi. So we were eating, and of course, this guy's a rabbi from Israel. I make sure that, nothing is. So we went to a place that he considered a kosher place, and we're eating salad. So we go through the salad line, and we get all kosher salad. And then I get a jalapeno and put it in my salad. Oh, nice and hot jalapeno. And so we're eating, and he's kind of a little, I'm eating unkosher food, unclean food. My food is unclean. I got the same thing as he did so that I could, except I got a jalapeno. And then he tells me, I'm sorry, but that's not kosher. That's unclean. What do you mean it's not kosher? He says, in Jewish halakha, now this is a, rabbi from Israel, said, in Jewish halakha, you cannot mix wool and linen. True. You cannot have hybrids. You cannot plant 5 rows of, you cannot plant green chili and red chili in the same garden. That's a joke. I'll tell you about that one sometime. You cannot plant, 2 things at once. And you cannot have hot food and cold food at the same time. Well, the jalapeno was cold. So what's the problem? What's the problem? He said, yeah, but when you eat the jalapeno, is the jalapeno hot? Yeah, it's hot. Well, you cannot eat a jalapeno with a cold salad. So I got my jalapeno and threw it away. I wanted to be kosher. And that's how it gets. That's just one example, but there's all kinds of examples of that. Where you have to have 2 dishes, all this stuff. Now there's a meat and dairy controversy. Deuteronomy 14:21 says, you shall not boil a kid in its milk, in its mother's milk. Now a kid is not a child, but a kid is a baby goat. What they would do for purposes, pagan purposes, they would get a kid, the baby goat, and they would get the mother's milk and boil it and sacrifice the kid, and then boil the meat in the mother's milk. And this was a fertility ritual. That's all it was, a fertility ritual. But from this verse, a situation has come up today that it is not kosher. It is considered tamai if you eat meat and cheese together. So you can't have a cheeseburger. Why can't you have a cheeseburger? Because if you have a cheeseburger, what if, and most legalism comes with what if this cheese comes from milk from the same cow? And what if they have 4 or 5 reasons for that? Wait a second, that doesn't matter. This cheese, I'm sure, did not come from the daughter or the son of this cow. It gets even worse. You can't even have a chicken with cheese. Why? Because if you have a chicken sandwich and it has cheese on top, what if that cheese came from that chicken? Well, chickens don't have cheese, don't make cheese. Now we're laughing, and I don't want to be, again, disrespectful, but by laughing, we are making the idea that says something doesn't sound right. If you make 2 + 2 = 5, you will laugh at someone who says 2 + 2 = 5 or feel sorry for them. If you say 2 + 2 = 3, the same thing. Anyone who comes with those 2 numbers, you know something's wrong. 2 + 2 is 4. You can eat a cheeseburger. You can mix meat and cheese together, unless you have stomach problems. If you have stomach problems, don't do that. It'll mess up your stomach. We're talking about health. We're not talking about ritual. Again, these are also unclean from Scripture. Acts 15:20. We should send them a letter telling them to abstain from anything polluted by idols. Idols will pollute you. Fornication will pollute you. Meat of strangled animals will pollute you. And by blood pollute you. Wait a second. These 4 things, notice what they are. The 4 things that that James comes up with to Paul about the situation that Paul had. Peter was eating with believing Gentiles, and some of James' people come, and they're Pharisees, and they get upset, and so this is what they came up with. But notice that these are things that a Jewish person at the time would not invite you home, would not go to your home if idols, fornication, meat of strangled animals, or blood was in the mix. So this has nothing to do with these are the only things that a newborn Gentile. No, a newborn Gentile has to follow Shabbat, has to follow Kosher, has to follow all these other things. This is just about eating with these people. I want to thank you. And this week, we're going to do Yeshua Part 5 in the Ezra Institute. We're going to continue with the olive tree of Israel on Wednesday night. And next Shabbat, we're going to start our series preparing for Passover. So I hope that every one of you will join us or join us on YouTube, Facebook, on our studies here. As we close, I want us to know that whether you're Jewish or Gentile, whether you come from extreme Judaism or liberal Judaism, Catholicism, Protestantism, wherever you come from, remember, we don't want to go there. We don't want to go there. We want to go to Torah. We want to go to the prophets. We want to go to the messianic scriptures, the prophetic, apostolic scriptures. We want to follow what Adonai says, His way, Haderech. Let's stand. Yevarechecha Yahweh vaish merecha, Air Yahweh panav elecha vichunecha. Asa Yahweh panav elecha, vayasem lecha. Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May Yahweh lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a good day, and thank you for joining with us. Amen. Shalom, shalom. Welcome to Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries. Thank you for joining us on our channel. If you have enjoyed this teaching and would like to see more, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so that you can be notified when we have new videos. If you would like to support Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries, please visit us at olivetreefellowship.com or torahunleashed.org. We thank you for your past support and hope to continue with you. Shalom, shalom. Have a good day. Shalom, shalom y bienvenidos a Olive Tree y a la Torah desatada. Les doy gracias a ustedes y a Adonai por su apoyo que nos han dado aquí. Y si quieren continuar a hacer una donación, pueden ir aquí en torahunleashed.org o en olivetreefellowship.com y ahí pueden dar una donación. Su apoyo, su ayuda es importante en estos días. Shalom, shalom.